That is. Anyone wants this? No? No takers? All in Sanskrit. What? Not yet. I like that. I like that very much. I like that. Okay. I already found two or three discrepancies in the Bhashya, but I've forgotten what they are, so I'm sure. Still, some people are coming. Dottie is coming, yeah.
A few outside walking the dog.
Ah. Ramagiri is not coming. How do we know?
He's
here.
This one.
What do we do to this?
Just one more push Swamiji on the red flash.
Okay. Hello Radhika, how are you? Are you doing well? Good to see you here. Did you grow them? These are wonderful. Look at that. They are wonderful. Thank you. Namah Shivaya.
Yes, Swamiji.
Didn't go to Portland?
I didn't.
Wonderful. Good for us. Move a little bit more, both of you. Because we have so many yantras, these are all yantras.
Okay, so Swami.
No. How are you?
I'm good, thank you.
We are entering a nice portion, very nice portion of this, and we will see. Om Bhadram Karneभिः शृणुयाम देवाः भद्रं पश्येमाक्षभिर्यजत्राः स्थिरैरङ्गैः स्तुष्टुवागुंसस्तनूभिः व्यशेम देवहितं यदायुः स्वस्ति न इन्द्रो वृद्धश्रवाः स्वस्ति नः पूषा विश्ववेदाः स्वस्ति नस्तार्क्ष्यो अरिष्टनेमिः स्वस्ति नो बृहस्पतिर्दधातु ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ सहना भवतु सहनौ भुनक्तु सह वीर्यङ्करवावहै तेजस्विनावधीतमस्तु मा विद्विषावहै ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः ॐ ब्रह्मादेवानां प्रथमः सम्बभूव
ॐ ब्रह्मादेवानां प्रथमः सम्बभूव.
Keep the pace, because what tends to happen is we slow it down. In the beginning it's okay, but we've been chanting this for some time now. ॐ ब्रह्मादेवानां प्रथमः सम्बभूव
ॐ ब्रह्मादेवानां प्रथमः सम्बभूव
विश्वस्य कर्ता भुवनस्य गोप्ता
विश्वस्य कर्ता भुवनस्य गोप्ता
स ब्रह्म विद्यां
सब्रह्मविद्यां
सर्वविद्याप्रतिष्ठां
सर्वविद्याप्रतिष्ठाम्
अथर्वाय ज्येष्ठपुत्राय प्राह
अथर्वाय ज्येष्ठपुत्राय प्राह
अथर्वणे यां प्रवदेत ब्रह्मा
यां प्रवदेत ब्रह्मा
अथर्वातां पुरोवाचाङ्गिरे
पुरोवाचाङ्गिरे
ब्रह्मविद्यां स भारद्वाजाय
सभारद्वाजाय
सत्यवहाय प्राह
सत्यवहाय प्राह
भारद्वाजोऽङ्गिरसे
भारद्वाजोऽङ्गिरसे
परावरां परावरं नो परावरां शौनको ह वै
शौनको ह वै
महाशालः
महाशालः
अङ्गिरसम्
अङ्गिरसं
विधिवद् उपसन्नः पप्रच्छ
विधिवदुपसन्नः पप्रच्छ
कस्मिन्नु भगवो
कस्मिन्नु भगवो
विज्ञाते
विज्ञाते
सर्वमिदं विज्ञातं भवतीति
सर्वमिदं विज्ञातं भवतीति.
Yeah. So, we have seen the lineage. What about it? Lots of people in it, that's all. Various names, and that is to show that this knowledge has been given without attrition. How do we know that one of the teachers did not forget to impart something very important? Huh? How do you know? Yeah, you may be studying wrong things.
Because it was given to his eldest son.
No, I think it's because it's the whole.
Huh? Ah, that is better. Eldest son and all will come later. Oh, बाद में आएगा. So, because two reasons. This we have to really remember, that every knowledge is subject to attrition. This is that storage problem. Everything that you keep in storage atrophies after some times, including muscles. If you don't use them, what will happen? After that you cannot move, that's all. And then, so therefore, this knowledge is different because of two reasons, and this is to revise those two reasons. It is non-separate from you. Are you an established fact or are you to be established? You are established? Are you sure?
Yes.
Anybody has any doubt? Okay. So that means established fact means what? When I ask the question, are you here? What do you say?
Yes.
Yes. So therefore, you cannot say no, because even when you say no, you are saying yes, because you are advertising that presence. Correct? So since the knowledge is dependent upon that presence completely, because it's the knowledge, self-knowledge means that the self is that presence. Self is not body, mind, sense, complex, all these things. When we talk about Atma, self, it is that which inheres all this. All this is indeed that, but that is not any of this. This is one, the equation goes in a very interesting selective equation. So the first reason there cannot be any attrition is because the I is not subject to attrition. It's not that, pura, long time ago, I was whole. Then the I became fragmented. And then what? Then it disappeared. Then there is only one little piece of I, which is like, they keep some sacred objects. Like I went to Sri Lanka and there they had on display Buddha's hair, Buddha's tooth, like this. So then they open one casket, then another casket, then another casket. First that big casket is in the cupboard, then after that you go and open, and then finally you see one small fragment of the tooth, because the whole of Buddha is not there. I mean, here when we talk Buddha, we are not talking of Buddha as I, we are talking of the body here. So the Buddha's body is not there, and so therefore what is there? What is preserved is a small portion of the body. Since the body is partite, then it is subject to fragmentation and attrition, and because it is finite, it keeps losing things. But still, since there is a sense of sanctity, everybody goes to see that. Everybody goes to pay respects to the hair of Buddha, tooth of Buddha, like this, so many things. Not hair of Buddha, hair of the Prophet, yes. And hair of the Prophet, tooth of Buddha, all this we have, there is a certain sanctity associated with these objects. Why? Because they belong to some great, personages, some Mahatmas. And so, but here, the I is not subject to fragmentation, You see what I am saying? The I is not subject to fragmentation, it is whole. It cannot be improved upon. It cannot be, buttressed with some other things. Because what are you going to, puff it up with? Not I? I plus not I is what? Still I? In fact, the knowledge is that there is no such thing called not I. Everything is I. Everything rests on the I. And so this I is not subject to attrition at all. And so the knowledge centered on this I that unfolds the nature of this I also cannot be subject to attrition. And the second reason that was given, last week we saw, is that it is the knowledge of the whole. It's an impartite knowledge, and so it cannot be partly given or partially given. So you cannot say, that one half of the I was given in one Upanishad. The other Upanishad, being a little sloppy, only gives a tenth of the I. No, because everything is the whole, and we are talking of this wholeness, which is really non-separate from yourself. So really speaking, even if you want to be extremely technical about it, the knowledge does not impart the wholeness. Arre, what? Just now you are contradicting yourself. You just said it's the knowledge of wholeness. Yes, it's the knowledge of wholeness, but it doesn't impart the wholeness. What does it do? Remove the notions connected to the I that do not belong. And what are those notions? We know them very well. We are intimately cognizant of those notions because we are battered by those notions all the time. I'm insignificant, nobody loves me, I'm alienated, I'm afraid, I'm subject to fear, I'm finite, I'm mortal, I'm this, I'm that, and everything that I'm not, I take on to be the I. And then what is that? What I am, I don't take that on. I don't let myself identify with that which I am. So this is what is called a mutual superimposition, anyonya adhyasa. Because the superimposition of the I on not I things like the body, the mind, etc. And then the superimposition of the not I on the I, and the I is relegated to not I. Both ways it goes. And so this is why the knowledge is a systematical removal of ignorance and its broods, the mistaken notions, the mistaken identities, the mistaken identification, all that is removed because the knowledge of who you are is an established fact and it shines, already shines. That's why in between two desires, what is there? There is an accidental moment of contentment after one desire stops. They say this in the Shastra, and before the other desire begins, there is a slight period of, I don't think I need anything. Of course, that's a big lie, because the very next moment the person is wailing and wanting something or the other. But for that tiny little second, the tiny little brain says, enough, alam, I am okay. And in sleep, of course, one is okay, correct? If one was a querulous, complaining being, then one should be complaining in sleep also, correct? And sleep, one is non-complaining. Whether you are complaining or not, the other people in the household are definitely not complaining when you sleep, because when you sleep, you don't complain, therefore they also don't complain. This is wonderful. So therefore what? So therefore that shows that there is an aberration about a doubt about the nature of this I. Because is this I non-complaining or complaining? You cannot say both, because the complaint and non-complaining are completely opposed to one another. You cannot say sometimes it is complaining, sometimes it is not complaining. I mean, you can, but it would not be a very valid point. Why? Because it's like saying, sometimes this woman is pregnant and sometimes she is not. During the day she is pregnant, during night she is not pregnant. So during the day the Atma, the self, is a complaining self. During night it's fine. It doesn't complain. So therefore we have to, because there is this koti dvayam, because there is a doubt about the nature of this, what is the truth of me? Am I a wanting, complaining, dissatisfied, being, or am I a contented being? Both cannot coexist, because I have trouble with the coexistence. If there was no trouble with both of them coexisting, then I would say, okay, sometimes I'm complaining, sometimes I'm not complaining, just deal with it. You may say to the neighbor, deal with it. But are you able to deal with it? Huh? Are you able to deal with a dual, contradictory reality of being complaining at some times and non-complaining at some times, wanting at some times, wanting at certain times, discontented at certain times, and contented at certain times? Are you able to do that? Are you able to say, this is how I am, it's okay? It is not okay. What do you want to stop doing? Complaining. Even if you don't want to stop complaining, you want others to stop complaining, that itself shows that there is an aberration. Because if you accept the complaining self as the truth of you, then we would not be having this text. We would not be having this context or this text, we would not be having this conversation. But nobody wants to accept the discontented, wanting, partial, upset, sad, querulous being as the truth of the I. In fact, everybody wants to put it away. And this is even told to us by the pharmaceutical companies, which come up with new ways of combating anxiety, combating depression, combating, there are medicines to manage anger, medicines to manage loss of focus, medicines for discontent, medicines for everything. And many of them are over the counter. You just go to the counter and you just pop it and come back. That's all it is, Many of them are, natural. And of course in Eugene you find the organic versions of everything. So this is how it is. So this itself shows that the society accepts that all these things, anger, depression, discontent, fear and complaints, all these are aberrations to what is the self. Even they have not, the pharmaceutical companies and the society has not studied Vedanta. You don't need Vedanta to understand what you really want and who you really are. It is sensed, it is universally sensed. Just like if I ask a question, do you exist? You don't have to make a phone call to find out. You don't have to call the significant other, Madhu, what is Madhu? Honey, do I exist? You don't have to make that phone call. Why? Because that you are, Don't ask the next question. What is the next question? Who am I? What am I? That's where you'll get all kinds of mixed up answers. Like noodles, Yeah. When you try to remove one, certain other tangled notions come along with for free. So these notions are the problems. And so the teaching lineage, exists to dispel these notions, not to drill some new knowledge. It's not indoctrination. It's a knowledge that works, even though it's called self-knowledge, it's a knowledge that works by the dispersal of notions that are unwanted, which attach themselves to the I by force of association, habit, identification, etc. So it's more of a mistake removal lineage, and the lineage has preserved this knowledge. So even though Vedanta is sensed by everyone, everywhere, and it is not just for Indians or Hindus or something like that, the Upanishads are for everyone who does not want to accept the wanting, querulous, discontented self as the truth of oneself. It's for everyone. Then what makes India so special? Some corner, what did they eat? Is it they ate some kind of special wheatgrass juice, or they drank that or something? What is it that differentiates? Because all indigenous traditions had this, and you can see this. When you talk to them for 5 minutes, they will say everything is one, everything is sacred. You can see this. You can see this in the Sufi poetry, you can see this in the indigenous knowledge bases. So what differentiates, the Upanishads? It's just that the teachers have preserved this knowledge. They have been the curators, and they have preserved it outside of the museum. That's the only difference. All other knowledge, if you want to learn about other, traditions and their wisdom, you have to unfortunately go to the museum. Because the preservers of those knowledge bases have been, decimated by greed, colonization, so many different, methods. And sometimes, people have been just decimated one by one. But sometimes people have been decimated in hordes. But here, this is one tradition where the teaching has been preserved outside of the museum, so that we can still enjoy this lineage. And without the lineage, really we are nothing. because the lineage has preserved this teaching. And then we saw all the teachers, so the teaching comes from Bhagavan. Bhagavan is Ishvara. Ishvara is our word for God. So teaching comes from Ishvara. And the reason that it is pointed out again and again is to underscore the fact that it is infallible, the knowledge is infallible, it is infallibly gained, and it is not touched with some kind of, it's immaculate, it's revealed. And then what? Then the person who received it is then, did not just, go off, did the service of giving this knowledge to somebody else, and all the names are given, so that the veracity of this knowledge is established, so that we, sitting at the edge of this Upanishad, are able to grasp this, and see the importance of the lineage. So now the lineage has made a full, a complete, rotation from teacher to student, and the student becomes a teacher, and then that student has a teacher, that teacher has a student, and that student subsequently becomes a teacher. And now who is the student?
Oh, yes.
Are you
Oh, no,
able?
Shaunaka.
Abba. Shaunaka. Shaunaka is the student. Yeah. And Shaunaka is described with an adjective. What is that adjective?
Sanna.
Yeah, that name itself means something. But what is the next word to Shaunaka? Look in the text.
He's Mahapurvasta.
Mahashalaha. Mahatyah Shalaha Yasya means the one who has built many big halls. Mahashalaha. What is he doing in these halls? Rolling around. What is he doing? Yeah, he's doing rituals. He's doing fire rituals. He's doing all the rituals related to worship as enjoined in the first portion of the Veda, whose purpose is ritual and the fruits thereof. How to live a dharmic life. That is the purpose of the first portion of the Vedas. And so he is still doing that. And he is distributing food in another hall to all the needy people. So he is doing charity and he is doing worship. Good for him, because let's not think of him as a wasted soul. This is called Vedantic snobbery. What is Vedantic snobbery? I have graduated from the first portion of the Veda. Those lowly mortals over there, they are still doing, ringing the bell and the incense and the arati and ding 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 ding, na tatra suryo bhati na chandra tarakam. We here, all is one is all. We will not enter a temple even if we are paid to do so. And this is Vedantic snobbery. And people say this all the time. After learning, sitting in on 2 classes, they say, I'm not going to temple anymore. Why? Because why? If I am Ishvara, if I am God, then why should I go? This is the problem. Then if you are God, why should you eat? You show up for every meal. So why should you eat? God doesn't need to eat. You cannot confuse the levels here. And this is what this whole Upanishad is about, keeping those levels, the absolute and the relative, in their places. The relative is subsumed into the absolute, whereas the absolute remains absolute, absolutely. So this is something we have to really understand. So this Shaunaka, why it is called Mahashalaha, it's not a curse word, like, oh, that stupid Shaunaka. It's actually a word of praise, because it takes such a person to qualify for the study of the Upanishad. The one that is disciplined, the one that is a giving person, the one that has done all the work that is there to do. Before one qualifies to look into the philosophical matters of who this I is. And what do I mean by qualify? It's not that Shaunaka had to take GRE, some kind of exam. No, this is not some kind of an exam. The qualify means one gets to a place of emotional maturity and spiritual growth whereby one starts to ask questions, where one is able to separate the means from the end. So all the pujas, the worship, the ding ding, the bell ringing, the incense, the flowers, the washing, the anointing, everything has paid off. That is a means to an end. The end being you. That's not the end in itself. If we regard the means as an end, it's the end. There's nothing more to say. Everything for us is a means to an end. Marriage is a means to an end. Children definitely are a means to an end. What is the means here? The means is self-growth. That's the thing. And what is the end? The study by which I understand the truth of myself. That is always the end. That is called moksha. Letting go of wrong notions, freedom. A total freedom from wrong notions of who this I is. That is moksha. That is the ultimate end. And all other relative ends are really for that ultimate end alone. So this Shaunaka goes to Angiras and then asks a very important question. Kasmin u bhagavaha, kasminnu bhagavaha Vijñāte, kasmin vijñāte sati, sarvamidam vijñātam, and we have to add here, iva bhavati, bhavet, Kasmin vijñāte, this is an absolute locative construction. And usually it is conditional. One context it is used is a conditional context in the sense that if this is true, then that is also true. When this is known, that is known. And it's also used in another context, in the sense of a conjecture or a speculation that is yet to be verified. That is also another way in which the absolute locative construction are there, where both are in seventh case here. Locative case. Kasmin, and then what else? Vijñāte. Yeah. U is just a particle for emphasis. Yeah. So, kasminnu vijñāte, knowing which one thing. Sarvamidam vijñātam bhavati, everything is known. This is a very puzzling question. When you know one thing, that too with great difficulty, do you know it completely? No. Whatever you know partially. In fact, the more you know that you don't know. Correct? Yeah, more you know, the more you are painfully aware of how much you don't know. This is with regard to anything that you take in the universe, except the knower, the nature of the knower. So with every body of knowledge, there is never, alam buddhi is not there. What is this alam buddhi? Enough. The understanding, okay, I have had enough. Sometimes people do 3, 4 PhDs, as if one was not horrifying enough. And so, why? Because that thirst for that knowledge, because I want to know something completely, but it's not possible. And so you go on, go on questioning, go on unearthing, go on digging. You do a lot of khananam, from khan to dig. You keep doing digging. And then the more you dig, the bigger the hole becomes, correct? Yeah. And so the hole is where? Here, the vast gap of understanding. The more you dig, the more the hole becomes. And so you find yourself afflicted with vast gaps of understanding, and the more you know, the more you don't know. So then how can he ask the question, the more, what is that one master key of the universe, knowing which everything is as well as known. This is his question. That shows his maturity. That is why this thing is there. That shows also that this Upanishad is in line with all. There is a samanvaya, an agreement. There is no contradiction with other Upanishads which also begin in the same manner, in a similar manner. In the Chandogya Upanishad, the teacher asked the question, and that was quoted earlier. Ena shrutam shrutam bhavati, amatam matam, avijñātam vijñātam, meaning that knowledge by which everything that is unheard becomes heard, everything that is unknown becomes known, everything that which you are uncertain about becomes certain. That is the Chandogya Upanishad. Then you turn to the Taittiriya Upanishad. Brahma vida apnoti param. The knower of Brahman gains the ultimate. So knowing that one thing gains everything. Sarvan kaman samashnute. All desires are felt, or actually fully felt, or fully filled by knowing which one thing. By gaining one thing, all the desires are fulfilled. How is that possible? Suppose you have desire for ice cream. Okay, wonderful. And then along with ice cream, you also have some desire for some savory things. Sambar. And then you have desire for something else, which is a completely different taste. And then how can just eating one thing, fulfill all the desires at the same time, unless you mix all of them and eat, and it will be most unsavory. Here we are not talking of the gamut of individual desires the person has and fulfilling them one by one. We are talking about the nature of the desirer itself, and the nature of the desiring person being non-desiring, and the only desire that the person really has is to be non-desiring. That means gaining this understanding of myself as the truth of the universe, there are no more desires left. This is what it is. So therefore there is an abiding presence of this kind of vakyas, sentences of query in the opening of many Upanishads. So this Upanishad is also in keeping with that. There is an abiding presence of such sentences, and so Shaunaka's sentence is nothing to be, is not remarkable in that way that the Upanishad opens with the sentence or the question from the student, O revered sir. Let's look at the question. Kasmin u bhagavaha. Bhagavaha means Bhagavan. What is Bhagavan? Huh? Which case?
All
Which case? Which case is Bhagavan?
one.
One?
No.
Chant the whole case. Yeah. First one I didn't hear.
I said Bhagavan.
Huh?
Oh, Bhagavan, I said.
Bhagavan you said?
I did say.
No.
It's Bhagavaha. I don't know.
Which case?
This one here.
No. Bhagavan.
Bhagavan.
It's not here. I'm saying it's from the Bhashya. So Bhagavan is which case?
One is one.
Okay.
Vocative. Thank God.
Oh.
Yeah. Oh, yes. Bhagavan, Bhagavantau, Bhagavantaha. Whereas Bhagavan, do you hear the short and the long?
But it's Bhagavaha, isn't
No, we are not talking of here. We are talking of what that translates as.
it? Okay.
Yes. Hey Bhagavan.
They're confusing me.
Yes. Vocative. Hey Bhagavan. This is the translation of that Bhagavaha. Because that is Chandasam.
Okay.
Yeah. So we are talking of Bhagavan. Bhagavan means vocative, O Lord. So why is he calling the teacher Lord? Is he confused?
No.
Then? Why? Hmm?
Knowledge comes from.
Okay, and you're still skirting around the issue. Little, afraid to jump in.
Because the teacher knows that concept is Brahman.
Yes, because the teacher is non-separate from what is taught. The student is also non-separate from what is taught. Then why do you call the student student? Is there a dent in your buddhi that you are calling the student student? No, the only difference is the student is in the process of knowing the teacher knows. And the teacher who was also a student before. That's all it is. There is no difference. So what is the teacher? The teacher is what the teacher elucidates. And what does the teacher talk about? Bhagavan. So the teacher who talks about Bhagavan is Bhagavan. The teacher who talks about Brahman, and because we are not talking of just Brahman as, the Brahman as that, what's that called? That the cause of the universe. We are talking of Brahman not as the substance of everything. Satyam Jnanam Anantam, no. We are talking of Brahman as the cause of the universe. We are talking of Brahman as a conscious being, as that non-separation from Ishvara, that is the cause of all other yearning and longing. The longing comes from separation. The anxiety comes from separation. The alienation comes from separation. And the separation not being real, it is a notional separation. Just like the child can miss its mother or father or caregiver, even though the mother or the father might be in the next room. But the child feels anxiety because it doesn't know, because of its own ignorance. So similarly here, from the mother and the father of the universe, there is a sense of separation. And that sense of separation is from one's own self-ignorance, not knowing that I am one with the mother and the father of the universe. And since the student is coming from a place of devotion and shraddha, faith pending understanding, the teacher is addressed as Bhagavan. The teacher is seen as worshipful. Why? Because the teacher is a stand-in. Until I am able to see this, the teacher becomes a stand-in for that which I want to see. Like a placeholder, The teacher stands in between you and Bhagavan. Oh, that's very mean. Why the teacher is coming in between me and Bhagavan? Otherwise all your silly notions will come. That's why. So the teacher stands, and then you see, then the teacher's job is to move away. So that oneness, that moving away is the learning of this oneness. Yeah. And we have heard this. Long time ago I said this to somebody. We have heard this expression that when you are ready, what happens? The teacher appears. I said not in our tradition. In our tradition we say when you are ready, the teacher disappears. I said that to you long time ago. Yeah. When you are ready, the teacher disappears. Of course, the person got panicked. What do you mean? The teacher disappears. Disappears into you, as you. That's all it is. This is the beauty of the tradition. Is that the teacher no longer remains the teacher, the student no longer remains the student, Bhagavan no longer remains Bhagavan. This is what is non-dualism. This is what is called Advaita. And really speaking, you cannot say, I am a Vedantin. Who is a Vedantin? The one who is in Vedanta. And I am a Vedantin, and then of course, everything is separate from me. There is no separation. The separation is as though. And so here, the teacher is addressed as Bhagavan, as an incarnation of God, as a manifestation of God itself. Why? Because I am trying to understand myself as that God from whom I feel alienated, from that Ishvara from whom I feel terribly alienated. I am trying to understand that for myself. And so I'll take it upon faith that you have this knowledge and you are going to teach me this. And also we had said that vidhivat upasannaha. Vidhivat means following the norms of how to approach the teacher. The student Shaunaka approached, meaning with respect and with a sense of deep regard and reverence, which is expressed in Bhagavan, He Bhagavaha. And then what? He says, Kasmin u Vijnate, knowing which one thing, Sarvamidam Vijnatam Bhavati, everything is known. This shows his maturity. What does it show? It shows that he senses that there is a oneness. And he also senses that in order to access this oneness, there's only one thing that I have to know. It's not that many things will lead me to this oneness. Because why? He is a Mahashala. He has tried many things. In his life he has tried. He has worshipped. He has, done this, done that. He thought, okay, maybe by, charity I will gain this. He has tried that. Doubtlessly he has tried meditation. Doubtless he has tried everything. And what stop till you finish. Okay? Yeah. You didn't miss anything, don't worry. Yeah. It was just a little. Yeah. Yeah. You didn't miss anything at all. So, you see the inner maturity of the person. And how do you see the inner maturity of the person? Because it's not just in trying to sit and intuit the answers there is the inner maturity. Because he knows that you cannot intuit the answers. He wants to find out the nature of the intuitor, if I can use that word. And so the inner maturity comes from understanding that there is a kind of a Grand Canyon-like gap between what I want and the means I am taking to get what I want. If you want to go to New York, but then you get off the plane and you find yourself again and again in Portland, what went wrong? Huh? You took off on the wrong plane. And I've told you this many times. In my travels I have to take these small planes, Eugene to Portland, Portland to Eugene. And even the very interesting one, there was one, what is that? Southern Georgia, where earlier I used to live. Atlanta to Valdosta, tiny plane. And they would tell you, please do not sit in that seat. Oh, but my boarding card says this. No. The plane will fall. So please come and sit in front or sit in the back. They would tell you. Yeah. Because the plane was so small and so precarious. But yes, but that's not the point of the story. The point of the story is that I would sit there and then the flight attendant would announce, this plane is headed to Valdosta, Georgia. If you are not headed there, please get off. And 2-3 people would get off each time. Many times they would get off, they would say, oh, and then they would remove their things and get off. This is what it is. And so for the one who has his finger in every pie, you want to get you want to get moksha by you want to moksha it out by aerobics, exercise it out, you want to meditate it out, you want to read it out, you want to write it out, You want to shout it out, you want to, garden it out, you want to do so many things. Barbecue it out, very unsavory metaphor, but whatever it is. But you want to do so many things to lead where? To yourself. So where are you headed? Here. So where are you, what kind of a plane are you catching to the wrong destination? So this is called the technical term now for catching the wrong planes, or what it symbolizes is sadhana sadhya asambandha. Asambandha, non-connection between sadhana, my practice, my conduct, my approach, the means, and then what is the sadhya, what is to be gained. If what is to be gained is non-separate from me, it's already an established fact. And that means I don't know that. That means I'm ignorant of that. So the knowledge only is the way here. So what about all the other things? The other things are auxiliary means to help one to get to the place of asking the right questions. Because if you don't know who you are and you keep asking the question, who am I? Who am I? Who am I? Who is asking? The one who is ignorant or the one who is knowledgeable? The one who is ignorant naturally. Otherwise, if you already knew, why would you ask like a mad person? You are asking because you don't know. So what answer, whatever answer comes, well, it will come from that, it will come from that ahankara. The ego is only going to answer, and that ego already feels that I don't know. Or even if the ego feels I know, it will be an egotistical answer. So this is not a knowledge of personality. In fact, it has nothing to do with the personality. In fact, it is to discern the person. Many personalities, one person. And that person is called Purusha. Purusha means the one without a second. So the I in everyone is being one and the same. Shaunaka is matured enough to ask this question, knowing which everything is as good as known. And Bhashya has a few things to say, the commentary. किम इति आह कस्मिन्नु भगवः विज्ञाते नु इति वितर्के भगवः हे भगवन् सर्वं यदिदं विज्ञेयं विज्ञातं विशेषेण ज्ञातं अवगतं भवतीति एकस्मिन् इज इट ज्ञाते और विज्ञाते एक फॉर मी इट इज विज्ञाते सो एकस्मिन् ज्ञाते सर्वविद भवतीति शिष्टप्रवादं श्रुतवान् शौनकः तद्विशेषं विज्ञातु कामः सन् कस्मिन्नु इति वितर्कयन् पप्रच्छ Kim iti aha. Kim iti aha means what did he say? So if one were to ask, this is a typical Sanskrit way of saying, let's see what he said. What did he say? Kasmin nu bhagavah. So it's a speculative locative construction, meaning it's a construction, grammatical construction that expresses a certain kind of a conjecture, knowing which, O Lord, yadidam vijneyam, all that which is to be known, vijnatam visheshena jnatam. Vijnatam means totally known, visheshena jnatam, known completely, Avagatam, Jnatam he describes as Avagatam. Avagatam means becomes known. Bhavati, Avagatam Bhavati, becomes known. And then to clarify, he says Ekasmin Jnate, knowing one thing, Sarvavid Bhavati iti. One becomes all knowing. Knowing one thing, one becomes all knowing. Why? The only way possible is because one is all is one. So if one is all, knowing one, one becomes all. Got it? Say yes. So we can proceed. Yeah. And then so knowing one, one becomes all because that one is all. And that all is I. Sarvavit Bhavati, all knowing. And so this is possible because self-knowledge or the study of the Upanishad is not one more body of knowledge to add to the various branches of knowledge. Because you see, specialties are branching out. You take the medical profession. All of them are standing there from the, from the brain specialist to the podiatrist, from head to toe, they are standing there waiting to examine you. Not you, various body parts of you. You go to the podiatrist and you say, I have an ankle problem. No, I only deal with foot. Then you have to go to ankleologist, if there is such a person. And then if the problem is little higher, then you have to go to shinologist. And then you have to go to the knee specialist, who only deals with knees. And then, like this, and then of course there is a dermatologist. What about that? Knowledge is skin deep. And and then you have all these specialists, but the medical profession, every body of knowledge has branched out to so much that you become highly specialized in a small little portion. And so this Upanishad is not one more body of knowledge to add to these various bodies, pun intended, body parts. It's not one more thing. It is that which sustains all knowledges and transcends them at the same time, and we'll see how as we proceed. How does it sustain everything? We already saw earlier, it is that knowledge because of which everything exists. It is that one thing because of which everything exists. So that's why it is called Sat, means the only thing that exists. So if we say, for example, what is this? Flower. Flower is, right? And then if I keep on holding it like this with a warm hand, what will happen? Yeah. You can say flower was, or you can say wilted flower is. The is doesn't go away. It just changes position. It just hops around to various and attaches itself to various names and forms, which itself shows that the is doesn't go away. In other words, does the existence of the flower belong to the flower or to something else? This is our question. If the existence of the flower, belonged to the flower, then when the flower goes, the existence also should go, correct? But the existence continues. Even grammatically we say flower is, and even when you say flower was, if you decode that, what are you saying? Absence of flower is. You see, the is never goes. The is that never becomes is not is you. Even though this is not grammatically correct, it is actually correct. So the is that never becomes was is you. You are the I that never was. You are the is that never was and never will undergo any change. So what about all the changes that I look at when I look at the mirror? What do you look at when you look at the mirror? Body. And supposing you say, oh, I keep forgetting, something is wrong. What are you looking at now? You're looking at the mind. In fact, the one that is cognizing the forgetfulness hasn't forgotten that I forget. See? So I'm remembering that I forget. So that means I know. The I know that never becomes I don't know. The I am that never becomes I am not. That is the isness. And the isness resolves into Ishvara. That isness for us is called God. What is Bhagavan. What is God. So if you say Ishvara, what is the first two letters of Ishvara? Is. So the is resolves in Ishvara. What is the first letter of Ishvara? I. Which ultimately resolves in I. So flower is, wilted flower is, dead flower is, and then compost is, another flower bush is, another thing is. So all the is, body of knowledge is, knower is, known is. The is dependent upon this one knowledge that is without a body. Really? Every other thing is called body of knowledge. That which embodies all bodies of knowledge, which itself is without a body, limitless, is called Brahma Vidya, the knowledge of Atma, the knowledge of I. So the I knowledge of I is what? Is without a second and is different from other bodies of knowledge, because the other bodies of knowledge finite, this knowledge infinite. It reveals the I as infinite. The other bodies of knowledge depend on this body, this knowledge alone. All bodies, all branches, every name, every form, every word, every meaning depends on I. Really. If I were not there, then nothing is there. Really. Because you say flower is, correct? And now we go into the Zen realm. You know what is the Zen realm? You start talking in cones. What is these cones? Not ice cream cone. I think it's called kovan. And so what is this kovan? If a tree falls in the middle of the forest, does it make a sound? That's a very interesting question. Does it? Does it not? And nobody is there. The idea is there is no observer. When there is no hearer, can sound exist without a hearer? Very interesting. Very interesting question. You can say, yes, it exists. What is the proof? I can ask. Okay, no, it doesn't exist. If you say, no, it doesn't exist, then, how do you know? How do you know it doesn't exist? When there is no observer, how can you say it doesn't exist? See, so both ways, it's a very, very intriguing question. And also, really speaking, the sound comes from what? How do you say there is a sound? How do you know that there is a sound? Sound comes from what? Silence. Sound has to emerge from silence, correct? And then sound goes back to what? Silence. How do you know? Because in between two sentences I take a breath and then I don't talk, so that's how I know. So sound comes from silence, it goes back to silence. And so that sound and silence are linked, correct? In a way. So if the tree falls, does it make a sound? That means it is incumbent upon, we are talking about the emergence of sound from that non-sound. So the truth of sound is non-sound. And that which doesn't make a sound is I, Ashabdam. This very Upanishad is going to say very quickly. Ashabdam, Shabdam na vidyate yasya. No, but I make a lot of sound. We are not talking of that I, okay? Yeah. That which does not need to make a sound to make itself heard, that is the I. So here the question is very laden, it's a loaded question. So he says, knowing which one thing, everything is known. So that knowledge upon which that existence, which is a conscious presence upon which everything depends, a limitless conscious presence which I cognize as myself, but upon which everything depends. What is that one thing knowing which everything becomes as well as known? Because now there are two orders of reality. One is the impermanent, like flower, pot becomes crackpot, flower becomes flower vase, and all these things. flower becomes petals and all these things. And then so that, there are two things. One is what is always finite, always subject to change, always ever changing forms and names, and that upon which it rests, that permanent, immortal, unchanging presence, which is limitless. Limitlessly it lends its presence, as it were, to all names and forms without being any name or form in particular. That's why we say nameless, formless, and that's why we say when the mind goes, it comes back having beaten a retreat, because it cannot grasp it as an object. Why? Because it is the content of the subject. More we'll see after the break. Om Purnamadav Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Harihi Om. Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. 15-20 minutes, we'll come back.